The gentle rhythm of rain and the low rumble of distant thunder begin to quiet the world around you. You are about to drift into a deep, restful sleep, carried away by the sound of a storm at sea. This is not just a journey into dreams, but a voyage into the past, where the crashing waves and howling winds form the backdrop for incredible true stories of mystery and history. By the end, you will have discovered how the ocean's fury has shaped our world, all while being lulled into a profound state of relaxation. What happened to the crew of a ship found sailing perfectly but completely empty? And why have so many treasure-laden vessels vanished without a trace during these violent gales? What is the one mystery from the depths that you find most compelling? There is something uniquely powerful about a storm at sea that transforms ordinary events into timeless legends. The ocean is the last great frontier on our planet, a vast and largely unexplored world that holds its secrets close. When a gale begins to build, whipping the waves into a frenzy, that sense of the unknown is magnified 1,000-fold. The storm becomes a character in the story, an unpredictable and overwhelming force that can erase a ship from the face of the earth in an instant. This is why tales of ghost ships and lost treasures resonate so deeply with us. They are not just stories of things that were lost, but of moments frozen in time by the ocean's fury. Consider the countless treasure galleons that sailed from the New World, their hulls heavy with gold and silver. In fair weather, their journeys were calculated affairs of navigation and wind. But when a hurricane descended, that same ship became a tiny shell tossed by forces beyond human comprehension. Its fate, whether it rested on the seabed for centuries or was found drifting with no one on board, was sealed not by maps or plans, but by the raw power of nature. The mystery is not just what happened, but how the immense, indifferent sea can create a puzzle that we are still trying to solve generations later. What is it about these vanished crews and sunken fortunes that continues to pull at our curiosity, even as the waves and the years roll on? This same power that can erase a ship from the sea also holds a profound ability to quiet the mind. The rhythmic crash of waves and the low rumble of thunder are not just sounds of chaos, they are a form of natural therapy for the human brain. Our nervous systems are hardwired to interpret certain sounds as signals of safety. The steady, predictable pattern of ocean surf, the deep bass of distant thunder, these are low-frequency noises that mask the jarring, unpredictable sounds of the modern world, like a slamming car door or a ringing phone. This sonic blanket tells your primal instincts that you are sheltered, that the storm is outside and you are safe within, allowing your body to lower its guard and slip into a state of deep relaxation. Physiologically, this soundscape works its magic by slowing your heart rate and easing your breathing. The constant, non-threatening noise gives your brain a single, monotonous focus, helping to quiet the internal chatter of anxieties and to-do lists. It encourages the production of relaxing brain waves, gently guiding you from a state of alertness toward the threshold of sleep. This is the core purpose of our journey together, to harness this natural, sleep-inducing power and pair it with the grand narratives of history. We are not just listening to a storm, we are setting sail on a sea of stories, allowing the waves to carry us not only toward restful sleep, but also toward the forgotten corners of our past. The mysteries of the deep become the fabric of our dreams, where the line between a sinking treasure ship and a drifting thought begins to beautifully blur. The deep, resonant crash of a wave against an unseen hull reverberates through the darkness, a powerful bass note that seems to shake the very air. It is followed by the long, mournful howl of the wind, a constant force twisting through rigging and whistling past the ears. This is the symphony of a storm at sea, a layered soundscape designed to pull you deeper into relaxation. Close your eyes and you can almost feel the cool, salt spray mist on your face. See the occasional flash of distant lightning that illuminates nothing but churning, black water for a moment before vanishing. The thunder is not a sharp crack, but a low, rolling growl that starts far away and rumbles slowly closer, a natural drumbeat to the chaos. Every so often, the sharp creak of aged timber joins the chorus, the sound of a ship breathing and flexing against the immense pressure of the ocean. This entire auditory world is built to cradle you, with the narration resting gently atop these sounds like a lone voice in the captain's quarters, telling a story by lantern light while the tempest rages outside. The rhythm of the waves and the wind creates a predictable, almost hypnotic pattern for your mind to follow, a sonic blanket that smothers daily worries and guides your nervous system toward a state of deep calm. As you listen, the boundary between the story and the storm will begin to dissolve, the tales of historical mysteries becoming one with the very elements that often created them. What secrets might the next peal of thunder carry across the water from a time long past? For the ancient mariner, a storm was never just a storm. It was a message, a punishment, or a battle between gods. Long before science could explain low-pressure systems and trade winds, sailors looked at the churning sea and saw the wrath of an angered deity. The Greeks believed Poseidon, the earth shaker, controlled the oceans. When he was pleased, the seas were calm and the voyage was swift, but when his trident struck the water, the resulting tempest was a clear sign of his displeasure. A ship lost to the waves was not a victim of bad weather, but a sacrifice to a capricious god. The Vikings, who braved the North Atlantic in their legendary longships, saw their own gods in the elements. Thor, with his mighty hammer, was the source of thunder and lightning. A storm was not a random event, but a celestial battle, a spectacle of divine power that they were caught in the middle of. These were not just stories to pass the time, they were a framework for understanding a world that was terrifyingly unpredictable. How could a simple sailor hope to comprehend the immense force that could shatter his vessel and drown his crew? It was easier and perhaps more comforting to believe it was the work of a being with motives, however inscrutable, rather than pure, indifferent chaos. The sea itself was a living entity filled with monsters and spirits. The Romans told tales of Neptune's court beneath the waves, and a sailor might offer a prayer or a small sacrifice before a journey, hoping to buy safe passage from these powerful forces. This deep-seated belief in the supernatural nature of storms gave rise to countless superstitions that persisted for centuries. Whistling on a ship was forbidden, as it was thought to whistle up a wind, summoning a gale from nowhere. Bringing a banana aboard was considered bad luck, a belief some trace back to the poisonous spiders that often hid in bunches of the fruit, causing sickness among crews. These rituals and taboos were a way for sailors to exert a tiny bit of control over a vast and uncontrollable environment. If they followed the rules, perhaps the gods would look upon them favorably. The creak of the timbers and the roar of the wind were not just sounds, they were the voices of the ocean itself, and every mariner knew to listen closely. What other secrets did they believe were hidden in the depths, just waiting to be heard during the next great gale? The howling wind seems to whisper a name known to every sailor who has ever feared a gale: the Flying Dutchman. This is perhaps the most enduring ghost ship legend born from the stormy seas, a tale of arrogance and a curse that can never be broken. The story begins in the 17th century with a Dutch captain named Hendrik van der Decken. He was sailing the treacherous Cape of Good Hope, a place notorious for its violent, sudden storms, when a hurricane descended upon his vessel. Determined to round the Cape despite the impossible weather, the captain was said to have sworn a blasphemous oath, vowing to complete his journey even if it took him until doomsday. For his defiance, his punishment was eternal. His ship, the Flying Dutchman, was condemned to sail the world's oceans forever, never making port, a permanent prisoner of the tempest. The ship became an omen, a spectral vision seen in the mist and rain of a raging storm. Sailors for centuries have reported spotting its ghostly outline, a phantom vessel with tattered sails glowing with an unearthly light, fighting against a wind that drives it nowhere. One famous account comes from the future King George V of Britain, who, as a young naval officer in 1881, recorded in his diary that he and 13 other crew members saw the Dutchman at dawn, a red light shining where a phantom crew would be. These sightings were always considered a harbinger of doom, a sign that misfortune or death was near for those who witnessed its haunting passage. The legend of the Flying Dutchman is more than just a campfire story. It is the ultimate symbol of the sea's eternal mystery. It represents every ship that ever vanished without a trace, every crew lost to a gale, their stories untold. The phantom ship is the ocean's way of reminding us that some secrets are never meant to be recovered, that some voyages never truly end. It sails on in our collective imagination, a permanent fixture in the storm, forever battling the waves it once defied. What other ghostly echoes from the deep might still be riding the winds of tonight's gale just beyond the edge of sight? While the storm's fury often meant an end, for history it was sometimes a perfect beginning. The same violent waves that claimed a ship could also seal it in a deep, cold, and dark embrace, preserving it for centuries as a perfect time capsule. These shipwrecks are not just graves or lost fortunes, they are accidental museums holding moments of daily life frozen in a single, catastrophic instant. The Swedish warship Vasa was one such vessel, a magnificent ship meant to project power, yet it sailed less than a mile on its maiden voyage in 1628 before a gust of wind filled its sails and sent it to the bottom of Stockholm's harbour. There it lay in the cold, brackish water for over 300 years. When it was raised in the 1960s, it was almost perfectly preserved. The wood was intact, and its hull was a gallery of intricate carvings depicting lions, warriors, and biblical heroes, all telling a story of a king's ambition and a nation's pride. But more than the grand sculptures, it was the everyday objects that breathed life into the past. Leather shoes, wooden bowls, a backgammon set, and the bones of a dog that had been aboard. These were the quiet, human details the storm had saved for us. Across the sea, the English warship Mary Rose met a similar fate. She was the pride of King Henry VIII's navy, a veteran of many battles, but in 1545, while engaging a French fleet, she suddenly heeled over and sank in the Solent. The reason remains a mystery, perhaps a sudden gust, a poorly stowed cannon, or simply being overloaded for battle. The silt of the seabed acted like a time lock, preserving half of the hull and an astounding collection of artifacts. When archaeologists excavated the site, they found the complete skeleton of the ship's dog, a small terrier that had been chasing rats below decks. They uncovered longbows still ready for use, chests of the carpenter's tools, and even the personal possessions of the crew, like wooden knit combs and leather jerkins. These wrecks tell us not just about kings and battles, but about the ordinary sailors, their diets, their tools, and the sounds and smells of their floating world. A storm did not just sink these ships, it pressed pause on an entire way of life, saving it for a future generation to discover and understand. What other moments, what other stories of laughter and fear might be waiting in the silent dark, preserved by the very sea that claimed them? Another ghost ship legend, far more tangible than the Flying Dutchman, began on a calm December morning in 1872. The British merchant ship Dei Gratia spotted another vessel, the Mary Celeste, drifting aimlessly in the Atlantic between the Azores and Portugal. Her sails were partly set, but some were frayed and hung limp, and she had a strange, listless air about her. Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia, knowing the Mary Celeste's captain to be a competent and experienced mariner, grew concerned. He sent a boarding party over to investigate. What they found has become the cornerstone of maritime mystery. The ship was perfectly seaworthy, with a full 6 months' worth of food and water in her stores. The cargo, over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, was largely intact. There was no sign of a struggle, no leaks in the hull, and the personal belongings of the crew and the captain's family were all undisturbed. Yet every single soul was gone. The captain, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the entire crew of 7 had vanished without a trace. The last log entry was from 10 days prior, and it noted nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if the people on board had simply evaporated into the salt air. The lifeboat was missing, suggesting a deliberate, if frantic, abandonment. But why would anyone leave a sound ship for a small boat in the open ocean, especially with a young child? The question has echoed for 150 years. One of the earliest and most dramatic theories was piracy or mutiny, yet this explanation falls apart quickly. Nothing of value was taken. The crew's belongings and the ship's chronometer and navigation instruments were all still there, items any pirate or mutineer would have seized. Another theory points to the cargo. Those barrels of alcohol could have leaked fumes, leading the captain to fear a massive explosion. In a moment of panic, he might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat tethered to the ship, waiting for the fumes to clear. Perhaps the line snapped and the Mary Celeste drifted away, leaving them to the mercy of the sea. Others suggest a sudden, violent natural event like a waterspout or a seaquake, a tremor under the ocean floor. The shock could have been severe enough to make everyone believe the ship was sinking instantly, prompting a panicked evacuation. Some have even proposed an attack by a giant squid, a fanciful idea that speaks more to our desire for a sensational answer than to any evidence. The truth is, we will never know. The Mary Celeste is a blank slate upon which we project our deepest fears of the sea. It represents the ultimate what-if, a story where all the facts are known, yet the central human drama remains a complete enigma. On a night like this, with the wind moaning through the rigging, it is easy to picture that ship, silent and waiting, a puzzle the ocean refuses to solve. What quiet sound, what shift in the air, was enough to make 10 people choose the vast, unknown ocean over the safety of their own ship? That same storm that could shatter a navy fleet was often a pirate's greatest ally. In the golden age of piracy, a rising gale was not just a threat, it was a tactical opportunity. While larger, more cumbersome naval ships and merchant vessels struggled to maneuver in heavy winds, the smaller, more agile sloops favored by pirates could dance through the squalls. They used the reduced visibility of driving rain and the chaos of towering waves to launch surprise attacks or make impossible escapes. A storm could scatter a convoy, isolating a fat merchant ship from its protectors, leaving it a perfect, vulnerable target. And when the weather cleared, the same tempest that had aided them could just as easily become their executioner. No pirate embodied this dangerous dance with the elements more than the infamous Blackbeard. His very name, Edward Teach, was spoken in whispers, a man who cultivated a persona of pure terror. He was said to weave slow-burning fuses into his enormous black beard, so that in battle his face would be wreathed in a ghostly, sulphurous cloud. He used fear as his primary weapon, but he also understood the sea's power with a cunning brilliance. In one of his most audacious moves, he blockaded the entire port of Charleston, South Carolina, holding the city for ransom. When he finally sailed away, he did so by navigating his fleet through the treacherous, storm-racked shoals of the Outer Banks, a passage that larger British naval ships dared not follow. He knew the local waters and trusted his smaller ships to ride out the swells where his pursuers would run aground. Yet, for all his mastery, the sea would ultimately claim him. His final battle in November 1718 was not against a hurricane, but against a small Royal Navy contingent led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard. The fight was brutal and close quarters, a chaotic melee on a blood-slicked deck. Blackbeard, according to legend, fought on despite being shot 5 times and cut more than 20, finally falling only when his head was nearly severed. His body was thrown overboard, and the story goes that it swam 3 times around the ship before sinking beneath the waves, a final, defiant act from a man who had lived by the ocean's rules. Other pirates were not so cunning. The ruthless Black Bart Bartholomew Roberts, one of the most successful pirates of the age, met his end in a sudden squall off the coast of Africa. His ship, the Royal Fortune, was caught by a surprise broadside from a British man-o-war just as the weather turned. Roberts was killed instantly by grape shot, and his crew, demoralized and leaderless in the mounting storm, quickly surrendered. The tempest that had so often been their accomplice became the backdrop for their final defeat. These stories remind us that for a pirate, the storm was a double-edged sword, a force that offered freedom and concealment one moment and utter destruction the next. They lived on the razor's edge of the weather, their fortunes rising and falling with the very winds that now whisper through the rigging of our own imaginary ship. What other echoes of their fierce, short lives might be carried on a gust of wind like this one? The dream of sunken gold has lured countless fortune seekers, but few prizes have proven as elusive as the lost treasure of the Flor de la Mar. This Portuguese carrack was a floating fortress returning from the conquest of Malacca in 1511, her hold so crammed with plunder that she was dangerously overloaded. She carried chests of diamonds and rubies, gold coins minted for a king, and exquisitely crafted solid gold statues, a fortune so vast it was said to be enough to ransom every monarch in Europe. But the Indian Ocean had other plans. A violent storm seized the ship off the coast of Sumatra, smashing her against the reefs. The hull, already strained by the immense weight of treasure, broke in two. The captain, Afonso de Albuquerque, a hardened veteran of the seas, managed to survive, but he could only watch as the half of the ship containing the bulk of the treasure sank into the depths, taking its secrets with it. For over 500 years, the legend of that lost hoard has fueled an obsessive quest. The estimated value of the treasure, adjusted for today, is almost beyond comprehension, a sum that dances in the billions. This is not just a story of wealth, but of a historical moment frozen by a storm, a king's ransom that vanished in a single night of howling wind and crushing waves. What would it be like to glimpse that golden cargo, still resting where it fell centuries ago? Modern treasure hunters, armed with satellite imagery and advanced sonar, have scoured the suspected wreck site for decades. The challenge is immense. The ocean currents in that region are powerful, and centuries of silt and coral have likely buried any remnants deep. Some believe the wreckage lies in shallower waters picked clean by locals long ago. Others are convinced it remains in the deep, a pristine time capsule waiting for the right technology to reveal its location. The Indonesian government has granted and revoked search permits. Its waters a protected graveyard for such historic wrecks. This legal and ethical battle adds another layer to the mystery. Is the treasure of the Flor de la Mar a legitimate prize for a modern adventurer, or is it a piece of world heritage that should remain undisturbed, a monument to the ocean's power to both give and take away? The storm that claimed the ship did more than sink a vessel. It created a myth that has outlasted empires, a siren call of glittering gold that continues to whisper from the seabed just beyond our reach. Even the most powerful fleet in the world is no match for the ocean's fury. When King Philip II of Spain sent his great armada against England in 1588, he dispatched 130 ships, a floating fortress meant to carry an invasion force and crush the English navy. The Spanish galleons were towering, formidable vessels, but they were built for the calm Mediterranean, not the wild, unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic. The English ships, by contrast, were smaller, faster, and more maneuverable. For days, the two fleets skirmished in the English Channel, the English harassing the Spanish formation but unable to break its defensive crescent. The real turning point was not a cannonball, but the wind. A series of powerful gales began to blow, pushing the armada away from its planned rendezvous with Spanish troops in the Netherlands and up the coast of England. The English, knowing their home waters, used the weather to their advantage, but the storm became a weapon for both sides. the final, decisive blow was delivered not by a fleet but by a tempest. After the Spanish were forced to break off their campaign and attempt a long, desperate voyage home by sailing north around Scotland and Ireland, they were met with a succession of brutal autumn storms. These gales shattered the great ships. Vessels were driven onto rocky shores, their hulls splintered by the waves. Others, their sails torn and masts broken, foundered in the deep water, taking all hands down with them. Thousands of Spanish sailors, already weakened by disease and hunger, drowned in the cold, churning sea. The storm did not just defeat the Armada, it annihilated it. Only a shattered remnant of the mighty fleet ever made it back to Spain. The fate of those sailors, lost far from home in a storm they could not comprehend, is a sobering reminder that in naval warfare, the greatest general has always been the weather itself. How many strategic plans, how many empires have been undone by a change in the wind and the rising of the waves? The ocean does not take sides, it merely asserts its absolute power over all who dare to challenge it. Against the relentless power of the storm stood a single, steady light. Lighthouses have been humanity's defiant answer to the sea's chaos, stone sentinels built to pierce the fog and guide sailors away from treacherous shores. The very first of these legendary structures, the Pharos of Alexandria, was a marvel of the ancient world, a towering white marble beacon that may have used a massive polished mirror to reflect firelight far out to sea, a technological wonder that stood for over 1,500 years. Its purpose was the same as every lighthouse that followed, to provide a fixed point of reference in a shifting, violent world, a promise of safe harbor when the waves threatened to swallow a ship whole. But these structures were more than just stone and light. They were homes to individuals who embraced profound isolation for the sake of others. Lighthouse keepers and their families lived in remote, wind-lashed outposts, often completely cut off from the mainland for weeks at a time during the stormy season. Their duty was a constant vigil, ensuring the lamp was lit at dusk and burned brightly until dawn, no matter how fiercely the gale rattled the windows or how high the waves crashed against the rocks below. The story of Grace Darling, daughter of a lighthouse keeper on the Farne Islands off England, became a 19th-century legend. In a raging storm in 1838, she and her father spotted the wreck of the steamship Forfarshire broken on the rocks. With colossal waves threatening to capsize their small rowing boat, they made the daring decision to row out into the tumult, rescuing 9 survivors from certain death. Her bravery, born from a life spent watching the sea's fury, captured the world's imagination and came to symbolize the quiet, everyday heroism of these coastal guardians. These keepers were the human element in an automated system, their resilience a direct counterpoint to the ocean's indifference. They weathered loneliness and danger, their steady hands and watchful eyes turning a beam of light into a lifeline. Even as modern technology has automated nearly all lighthouses, their beams continue to cut through the night, a timeless testament to our enduring struggle to carve out safety from the storm, a silent promise that even in the darkest gale you are not alone. The wind that shattered the Spanish Armada was a whisper compared to the scream that tore across the British Isles in November 1703. For 9 days, a hurricane of unprecedented violence raged, a storm so immense it was simply called the Great Storm. Barometers, a new and fascinating instrument at the time, plummeted to readings no one had ever seen before. The very ocean seemed to rise up against the land. Entire fleets were caught helplessly along the coast. The Royal Navy was devastated, losing 13 ships and over 1,500 sailors in a single night. The HMS Restoration, the HMS Mary, the HMS Northumberland, these proud warships were smashed against the rocks or simply swallowed by the waves, their crews lost to the churning dark. On the Thames, the river swelled into a torrent, submerging London streets and washing away homes. The lead roofing was torn from Westminster Abbey, and over 2,000 massive chimney stacks collapsed into the city's streets. The Eddystone Lighthouse, a brilliant wooden structure standing on a remote reef off Plymouth, vanished completely with its builder, Henry Winstanley, inside, proving that even the most defiant symbols of safety were no match for this elemental fury. The human cost was staggering, with estimates of 8,000 to 15,000 lives lost across the country, a national trauma that left the entire nation in a state of shock and mourning. This was not just bad weather, it was an event that seemed to question the very order of the world. In the storm's aftermath, a new form of writing emerged to make sense of the catastrophe. Daniel Defoe, who would later write Robinson Crusoe, was so captivated by the event that he collected accounts from across the country, publishing his findings as The Storm, a book many consider one of the first works of modern journalism. He presented the facts, the eyewitness reports, and the sheer scale of the destruction, trying to document the incomprehensible. The disaster also forced a profound change in how the nation managed its sea power. The massive loss of naval ships and seasoned sailors was a strategic blow that prompted the British Admiralty to develop more robust and systematic procedures for sheltering the fleet during extreme weather, a lesson written in blood and salt water. The Great Storm marked a pivotal moment where a society began to move from seeing such disasters as purely acts of God to understanding them as natural phenomena that could and must be prepared for. It was the ocean's brutal reminder of its supremacy, an echo of wind and wave that forever changed a nation's relationship with the sea. That same wind that howls outside your window has carried whispers of far more than ghost ships. For centuries, sailors returned from voyages with tales not just of waves and wind, but of living mountains of flesh and tentacle that rose from the storm-tossed depths. The most feared of all was the kraken, a beast of Norse legend so vast it was said its body could be mistaken for an island. When it surfaced during a gale, its long, slithering arms were strong enough to pull the largest galleon down into the abyss, the sound of splintering timber lost in the cacophony of the storm. This was not a creature of random fantasy, it was a direct manifestation of the sea's ultimate terror, the fear of the unknown predator that lurked just beneath the surface, waiting for the chaos of a tempest to strike. Medieval mapmakers who filled the blank spaces of their charts with the phrase "Here be dragons" were often illustrating these very legends. They drew serpentine beasts coiling around ships, their artwork a warning that the ocean was not just an expanse of water, but a realm inhabited by monsters. The Leviathan, a biblical beast of immeasurable power, was described in the Book of Job as making the deep boil like a pot, a perfect image of the sea in a frenzy. Sailors truly believed these creatures were real, and their stories were a way to give a face to the inexplicable dangers they faced. A sudden, violent lurch of the ship in a squall could easily be interpreted as the strike of a giant tentacle. The sight of a giant squid, a real but rarely seen animal, washed ashore after a storm would have confirmed their worst fears. These myths were a primitive form of science, an attempt to explain the very real phenomena of rogue waves, sudden whirlpools, and the simple, terrifying fact that the ocean was a world they could not see into. What they called a monster was often just the ocean itself, revealing a fraction of its immense, impersonal power in a form their minds could grasp. In the pitch black of a stormy night, with the ship groaning and the waves crashing, it was easier to believe in a conscious, malevolent beast than to accept the truth, that they were utterly at the mercy of a force that did not even know they existed. The kraken was not just a story, it was the embodiment of every sailor's deepest fear given a shape and a name, a shadow that moved within the storm. The life of a whaler was a brutal negotiation with the sea, where every storm was a direct threat to both life and livelihood. These men sailed from New England and Europe in wooden ships, venturing into the Atlantic and Pacific for voyages that could last 3 years or more. Their goal was the whale, a creature of immense value whose oil lit the lamps of the world and whose baleen shaped the corsets of fashion. But to reach it, they had to survive the ocean's fury. In the vast emptiness of the Pacific, a squall could rise from a calm sea in minutes, transforming a quiet hunt into a fight for survival. The ships were small and top-heavy, laden with barrels of precious oil that could break loose in a gale, smashing through the hull like cannonballs. Captain William M. Davis on the whaler Florida in 1846 wrote in his log of a hurricane off the coast of Japan. He described waves as high as mountains, with the wind tearing the very breath from his lungs. The ship was thrown on its beam ends, the masts nearly in the water, and for hours the crew believed each crashing wave would be their last. They survived by bailing water with buckets until their hands were raw, a desperate human chain against the indifferent sea. These logs are filled with such moments of stark terror, where the line between a successful voyage and a watery grave was as thin as a ship's plank. The economic pressure was immense. A single, large sperm whale could yield up to 3,000 gallons of oil, a fortune that made the risk seem worth it for ship owners in comfortable counting houses half a world away. For the men on the ships, the reward was a small lay, a tiny fraction of the profits, but it was often the only chance they had to escape poverty. This desperate economics drove exploration. Whalers chasing dwindling stocks became the unofficial mapmakers of the Pacific, discovering uncharted islands and navigating passages that naval charts declared empty. They relied not on official maps, but on hand-drawn sketches passed from captain to captain, a secret knowledge of the seas built on shared peril. The very language of the trade reflects its danger. The term Nantucket sleigh ride described the terrifying, exhilarating ride a whaleboat took when harpooned to a giant sperm whale, dragged at incredible speeds across the water. It was a ride that could end in a fortune or in the dark depths, a perfect metaphor for the entire industry. These voyages were not just business ventures, they were epic human struggles played out on the world's largest stage, where the sound of the wind was a constant companion, and the smell of salt and blubber was the smell of survival itself. What must it have been like to stand on the deck of a creaking ship, watching a storm build on the horizon, knowing that your life and the fortunes of your family back home depended entirely on the strength of the wood beneath your feet and the skill of the man at the helm? The cold air that night in April 1912 was deceptively calm, a stillness that masked a deadly confluence of arrogance and nature. The Titanic, a leviathan of human engineering, was steaming confidently through the North Atlantic, her passengers lulled by the ship's sheer size and the placid sea. But the ocean was setting a trap. That particular winter had been unusually mild, causing a greater number of icebergs than normal to calve from Greenland's glaciers and drift south into the shipping lanes. The sea itself was like a sheet of glass, a condition that, while beautiful, made spotting the telltale white foam at an iceberg's base nearly impossible. The lookouts in the crow's nest had no binoculars, and when Frederick Fleet rang the bell 3 times and phoned the bridge, his warning came just 37 seconds before the collision. It was not a dramatic crash, but a long, grinding tear along the starboard side, a sound that few passengers even noticed. The iceberg was not a sheer wall of ice, but a submerged ledge that gutted the ship below the waterline. The claim of being unsinkable was based on a revolutionary design of 16 watertight compartments, but the iceberg had slashed open 5 of them, a wound the designers never conceived possible. The ship was not designed to float with its first 5 compartments flooded, and so the mathematical certainty of its fate was sealed in mere moments. The hubris was not just in the claim, but in the actions that followed the warnings. Other ships in the area had sent radio messages about the ice field ahead, but the Titanic's wireless operators, overwhelmed with passenger messages, had deemed some of these warnings non-urgent. The ship was also traveling at near top speed through a known ice zone, a decision driven by a desire to make a sensational crossing time. The very weather that seemed so peaceful was the perfect condition for a disaster, creating a mirage of safety that blinded the crew to the clear and present danger. How many small choices, how many dismissed warnings had to align for this single catastrophic event to unfold? In the 2 hours and 40 minutes it took the ship to sink, a new kind of horror was revealed, not just of cold water, but of profound inadequacy. There were lifeboats for only about half of the 2,200 people on board, a calculation based on outdated maritime regulations that assumed ships would remain stable enough to ferry passengers to rescue vessels, not sink in the middle of the ocean. The chaos was not of panic, but of a slow, grim realization that there was simply not enough room. The band playing ragtime melodies to calm the crowd became a symbol of a world order clinging to its rituals even as it collapsed into the sea. The aftermath was a global shockwave. Official inquiries in both the United States and Britain grilled the surviving crew, the ship's owners, and the builders. They sought to assign blame, but their true legacy was a complete overhaul of maritime safety. The investigations exposed the deadly flaws in the lifeboat policy, the lack of mandatory 24-hour radio watch, and the dangerous practice of speeding through ice fields. Out of this tragedy, concrete, life-saving changes were born. Within 2 years, the first International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea was convened, establishing rules that still govern shipping today. It mandated enough lifeboats for every person on a ship, the creation of an international ice patrol to monitor and warn of icebergs in the North Atlantic, and the requirement for a continuous radio watch. The Titanic's sinking was the end of an era of blind faith in technology, a brutal lesson that the sea demands respect above all else. Its story is the ultimate irony, a ship celebrated for its invincibility becoming the very symbol of human vulnerability, a ghost that continues to whisper a warning with every chill breeze that blows across a calm, dark sea. That same deceptive calm that preceded the Titanic's fate seems to gather with a peculiar intensity in a stretch of ocean between Florida, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda. Here, the legends of the sea coalesce into one of the world's greatest modern enigmas, the Bermuda Triangle. It is a place where the normal rules of navigation appear to falter, where ships and planes have vanished not just in storms, but in fair weather, often without a single distress call. The most famous of these disappearances began on a clear afternoon in December 1945. Flight 19, a squadron of 5 United States Navy Avenger torpedo bombers, took off from Fort Lauderdale on a routine training mission. The pilots were experienced, the aircraft were fully fueled, and the weather was fine. But something went terribly wrong. The flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, radioed that his compasses were not working. He reported that he could not be sure of his position, stating that everything looked wrong, even the ocean. His final, cryptic transmission was a jumble of confusion, telling his men to head east when they were likely already over the Atlantic. The 5 planes with 14 crewmen were never seen again. As if the mystery demanded a greater sacrifice, a massive Martin Mariner flying boat was dispatched on a search and rescue mission. It too vanished completely, adding another 13 lives to the toll. Not a single piece of wreckage from any of the 6 aircraft was ever found. The official Navy report could only list the cause as unknown, a void of explanation that has fueled speculation for decades. This was not an isolated incident. The merchant ship SS Marine Sulphur Queen, a large tanker carrying molten sulfur, disappeared in February 1963 with 39 crew members. A lone life jacket was all that was ever recovered. The stories pile up, a catalogue of vanishings that defy easy logic. What force could erase a squadron of military planes and a massive ship from existence without leaving a trace? The theories proposed to explain the triangle's appetite are as strange as the mysteries themselves. Some scientists have pointed to vast reservoirs of methane hydrate trapped on the ocean floor. The idea is that a massive underwater landslide or a shift in pressure could release an enormous bubble of this gas. As it rushed toward the surface, it would decrease the density of the water so drastically that a ship would lose all buoyancy and sink in mere moments. The released methane rising into the air could also disrupt the atmosphere, causing aircraft engines to stall or even ignite. Others point to the region's unusual magnetic properties. The Bermuda Triangle is one of the few places on Earth where true north and magnetic north align, a phenomenon known as agonic line. For navigators relying on magnetic compasses, this could introduce small but critical errors in calculation, errors that could compound in poor weather or under stress, leading a vessel hopelessly off course. There are even discussions of rogue waves, sudden, colossal walls of water that can appear without warning and are capable of breaking a ship in two, or of electronic fog, a bizarre atmospheric phenomenon that supposedly scrambles instruments and induces disorientation in crews. Yet for all the compelling science, a simpler truth exists. The area is prone to violent and sudden storms, and it sits in the heart of the hurricane belt. The Gulf Stream flows through it, a powerful, warm current that can quickly erase evidence of a wreck and create treacherous sea conditions. The reality may be that the Bermuda Triangle is not a supernatural vortex, but a perfectly natural convergence of heavy maritime traffic, unpredictable weather, and human error, all magnified by the power of a good story. The legend persists not because the evidence is overwhelming, but because the idea is so compelling, a modern map where we can still inscribe "Here be dragons." It is a reminder that in an age of satellites and global positioning systems, the sea can still create a perfect, silent mystery, leaving us to wonder what secret the next gust of wind might carry from those haunted waters. A gale could just as easily blow a ship toward a new world as it could onto a waiting reef. For every explorer like Christopher Columbus, the storm was a constant, terrifying companion on the journey into the unknown. During his first voyage in 1492, his tiny fleet, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, was caught in the powerful currents of the Sargasso Sea and then battered by a storm that threatened to tear their vessels apart. The crews, already mutinous from weeks at sea with no sight of land, saw the tempest as a final, divine condemnation of their journey. Yet it was these very same Atlantic wind patterns, including the violent lows that spun off the coast of the Azores, that ultimately filled their sails and pushed them westward toward the Caribbean. The storm was not merely an obstacle, it was the engine of their discovery, a brutal and unforgiving force that also happened to be the pathway to a continent. Decades later, Ferdinand Magellan's expedition experienced this duality in its most extreme form. After navigating the treacherous strait that now bears his name, his fleet entered a vast, calm ocean. He named it the Pacific for its peaceful waters, but that tranquility was a mirage. The real trial was the sheer, unbroken expanse where supplies ran low and men began to die of scurvy. When storms did finally find them, they were a mixed curse. The squalls provided precious fresh water to drink, saving the lives of the remaining crew, but the waves and wind also scattered his ships, making it impossible to know if his companions had survived or been lost to the deep. The voyage was a relentless negotiation with the weather, where a single storm could mean salvation or annihilation, often in the same hour. These explorers did not conquer the ocean, they survived it, and their greatest discoveries were often accidental gifts from the gales. A ship blown wildly off course might stumble upon an uncharted island, a new current, or a previously unknown coastline. The very maps they were creating were shaped by these unpredictable encounters with the wind and waves. What we now see as a straight line on a historical map was, in reality, a desperate, zigzagging path carved by storms, a testament to the fact that the age of exploration was not a calculated science, but a prolonged act of faith in the face of the sea's immense and indifferent power. What other continents, what other cultures might have been first encountered not by a captain's design, but by the sheer, uncontrollable force of a hurricane's tailwind? The line between a storm's roar and a ghostly whisper is often thinner than a ship's plank. For generations, sailors have returned from their voyages with accounts that defy any logbook, stories of phantom ships that materialize from the squall only to vanish into the next wave. One persistent tale from the North Atlantic speaks of the SS Valentia, a passenger steamer that wrecked off Vancouver Island in 1906 with a terrible loss of life. Years after the disaster, other ships reported seeing a phantom lifeboat in those same waters, manned by skeletons that rode relentlessly into the storm, a silent, grisly crew forever searching for a shore they would never reach. Then there is the Yamashiro Maru, a Japanese freighter whose spectral form is said to haunt the waters of the Devil's Sea near Japan, an area often called the Pacific's Bermuda Triangle. Survivors from other vessels claim to have seen its ghostly outline through the driving rain, a ship consumed by an eerie green fire that does not burn, a chilling echo of its wartime demise. These are not just stories of sight but of sound. Off the coast of North Carolina, sailors speak of the Diamond Shoals, a graveyard of ships, where on particularly wild nights you can hear the phantom peal of a bellboy that was destroyed decades ago, its mournful clang a warning that comes from nowhere and everywhere at once. The most chilling tales are of the spectral crews themselves. The Flying Dutchman is the king of these legends, but it is far from alone. The Lady Lovibond is said to reappear every 50 years off the coast of Kent, England, a ghostly schooner doomed to reenact its tragic wrecking on a captain's wedding night, the sound of celebration and a woman's scream carried on the wind. What could possibly explain these countless, consistent reports from otherwise rational men? Some suggest a scientific phenomenon like St. Elmo's fire, an electrical discharge that can make a ship's mast glow with an unearthly light, easily mistaken for a phantom glow in the haze of a storm. Others point to the psychological effects of extreme isolation and fear. In the heart of a gale, with sleep deprivation and the constant strain on the senses, the mind can project its deepest fears onto the fog and spray, giving form to the formless terror of the ocean. Perhaps these ghost ships are a kind of psychic echo, a traumatic moment imprinted on the very fabric of a place, replaying for those whose senses are open enough to perceive it during the heightened reality of a storm. They are the ocean's way of remembering its own tragedies, a gallery of lost souls forever sailing the border between our world and whatever lies beyond. As the wind moans outside, it is easy to wonder if that particular gust carried a voice from another time, a story waiting for a listener in the dark. That same phantom storm you hear in the distance can now be measured, its ancient fury quantified by the quiet hum of a supercomputer. Modern meteorology acts as a time machine, allowing us to deconstruct the very gales that sank fleets and shaped empires. By feeding historical data into complex climate models, scientists can reverse engineer these legendary tempests, transforming sailors' terrified accounts into a detailed map of wind speed and barometric pressure. Take the Great Hurricane of 1780, the deadliest Atlantic hurricane on record. For centuries, it was known only through the fragmented, horrifying reports from the Caribbean. We knew it struck in the midst of the American Revolutionary War, devastating British and French fleets anchored in the region, and that it killed an estimated 20,000 people. But how powerful was it truly? Researchers began with the clues left behind in ship logs and personal diaries. A captain might have written that the barometer fell off the table, a phrase that, when translated, suggests a pressure reading so low it indicates a storm of almost unimaginable intensity. Entries describing massive storm surges that wiped entire towns off the map, or waves that carried ships far inland and deposited them in the middle of a forest, all become data points. When this historical evidence is woven into sophisticated weather simulation models, a vivid picture emerges. The models suggest the Great Hurricane of 1780 was likely a Category 5 monster, with sustained winds well over 150 miles per hour and a central pressure so low it would have placed it among the most powerful storms of the modern era. These reconstructions do more than just satisfy our curiosity about the past. They reveal long-term climate patterns. By studying the frequency and intensity of such historical hurricanes, scientists can identify active periods and quiet phases, linking them to broader oceanic cycles like the Atlantic multidecadal oscillation. This deep historical baseline is crucial for understanding our present and future. It helps us discern whether the powerful hurricane seasons we experience today are part of a natural cycle or a significant shift driven by a changing global climate. The desperate notes scrawled in a ship's log 250 years ago have become a key to forecasting the storms of tomorrow. The ghost of a hurricane past whispering vital secrets to the science of the future. Yet for all the sea's power to destroy, it also summons a profound and answering courage from the human spirit. Few stories capture this bravery more than the desperate saga of the SS Pendleton. In February 1952, a ferocious nor'easter, a storm of almost biblical fury, tore two massive tankers in half off the coast of Cape Cod. One of them was the Pendleton. Its stern section, with 33 men trapped inside, was drifting helplessly toward the deadly shoals. The waves were so colossal they swallowed the horizon, and the wind screamed with a force that tore the very warmth from the air. Into this chaos sailed a single 36-foot wooden lifeboat from the Coast Guard station at Chatham. Its commander was boatswain's mate, First Class Bernard C. Weber, a young man with a crew of 3. Their mission was deemed nearly impossible, a suicide run in a boat so small it was routinely swamped by waves taller than a house. They battled through the tempest with such violence that the windows of their pilot house were shattered, leaving them exposed to the freezing gale and blinding spray. Navigating by instinct and sheer will, they finally located the hulking, broken stern of the tanker, rising and falling like a monstrous iron piston in the swells. The Pendleton's crew had managed to lower a single, precarious rope ladder down the towering, vertical steel wall of the ship's aft section. One by one, the stranded men had to time their jump into the Coast Guard's tiny boat as it was thrown upward on a wave crest, only to plummet into a trough a moment later. A single misstep meant being crushed between the two vessels or lost forever to the black, churning water. With incredible skill and calm, Weber and his crew managed to pluck every one of the 33 men from the jaws of the sea, packing them into a boat designed for 12. They then faced the perilous journey back, their vessel now dangerously overloaded and low in the water, riding the storm back to safety. This was not an isolated act. Across the world and throughout history, similar tales of valor have unfolded in the heart of a gale. The Royal National Lifeboat Institution, the RNLI, has operated for nearly 200 years, its volunteers launching into some of the most treacherous waters on Earth simply because someone is in trouble. These are not soldiers or professional adventurers. They are carpenters, teachers, and fishermen who drop everything when the call comes, risking everything for strangers. Their motto spells out the quiet heroism of their duty. With courage, nothing is impossible. This is the other side of the storm's story. While the ocean's fury can erase a ship and create a ghostly legend, it can also reveal the very best of who we are. It forges a bond between those in peril and those who answer the call, a shared understanding that in the face of nature's overwhelming power, our humanity is our greatest lifeboat. What is it about the sound of the wind and waves that calls ordinary people to become heroes, to row directly into the darkness when every instinct must scream at them to turn back? The storm has always been more than weather. It is a profound metaphor that artists and writers have wrestled with for centuries, in the hands of the great English painter J. M. W. Turner. A gale at sea became a sublime spectacle of color and emotion. His canvases from the 1840s, like Snowstorm, show a world dissolving into elemental chaos. The steamboat is a mere ghost in the tempest, almost lost within furious swirls of wind, spray, and light. Turner had himself tied to a ship's mast for hours to experience a storm firsthand, and his paintings are not literal records but visceral experiences, conveying the overwhelming power of nature that reduces human industry to insignificance. He translates the storm's roar into a visual symphony where the boundaries between sea, sky, and ship are erased by the sheer force of the squall. This artistic obsession with maritime fury reaches back to the stage. William Shakespeare's final play, The Tempest, uses a magically conjured storm as its very engine. The opening scene, with the shipwreck that strands his characters on a remote island, is not merely a plot device. That storm represents upheaval, the shattering of the old social order, and the beginning of a transformative journey for every soul caught in its path. The wizard Prospero does not create the storm out of malice, but as a necessary chaos to bring about justice, reconciliation, and renewal. Here, the gale is an agent of change, a force that washes away the past and makes a new world possible. This duality, the storm as both destroyer and cleanser, resonates through our stories. In the 19th century, the Russian poet Alexander Pushkin penned his epic The Bronze Horseman, where a catastrophic flood in St. Petersburg is not just a natural disaster, but a symbol of the individual's helplessness against the monolithic power of the state and history. The waves that drown the protagonist's beloved become waves of despair and rebellion. These cultural works consistently return to the same powerful themes. The storm is chaos, the uncontrollable event that upends our carefully laid plans. It is divine intervention, a punishment or test from a higher power, much as the sailors of old believed, and it is transformation, the crucible through which characters must pass to be remade, stripped of their old identities by the wind and waves. When we look at a painting of a ship battling a hurricane or read of a magical tempest, we are not just observing a weather event. We are seeing our own lives reflected back at us, our own struggles against forces beyond our control, and our own hope for a calm dawn after a night of terrible fury. What other great stories have used the ocean's anger to tell us something essential about our own human journey? The same storms that sent ships to the bottom for centuries now guard them in a deep, silent museum, and we are finally learning how to visit. Underwater archaeology has transformed from a treasure hunter's gamble into a precise science, using technology that lets us see through the murky depths without ever touching a sight. Side-scan sonar acts like a powerful underwater flashlight, sending out acoustic pulses that paint a detailed picture of the seabed, revealing the ghostly outlines of a wrecked structure buried in silt. For closer inspection, remotely operated vehicles, or ROVs, are the archaeologist's eyes and hands. These diving robots, tethered to a support ship, can hover over a fragile site for hours, sending back crystal-clear video and using delicate manipulator arms to recover a single artifact from the sediment. This non-invasive approach is crucial as it preserves the context of every find, allowing a story to be told rather than just objects to be collected. A scattered pile of cannonballs can reveal the ship's final defensive posture, while the specific location of personal items can map out where the crew slept and worked. What do these technological whispers from the deep tell us about the lives interrupted by a long-ago gale? Recent expeditions have yielded breathtaking insights. The excavation of a merchant vessel from the 17th century, found in the Baltic Sea where cold, low-salinity water preserves would like a time capsule, revealed not just its cargo of trade goods but evidence of the crew's diet and health. Analysis of seeds and animal bones found in the galley area showed a surprising variety of foods, while the discovery of a small chest containing medicinal syringes and vials offered a poignant look at the era's battle against disease at sea. Another wreck, a Roman cargo ship located in the Mediterranean, was found with its amphorae still neatly stacked in the hold. By studying the chemical residues inside these clay jars, scientists determined they carried wine, olive oil, and a fish sauce called garum, mapping a precise trade route from Spain to Italy that was suddenly cut short by a storm. Each of these discoveries is a piece of a vast historical puzzle, helping us understand everything from global economics to the spread of cultures and even pandemics. A ship that sank while carrying people can become a genetic snapshot of a population, with studies of skeletal remains revealing origins, inherited diseases, and the physical toll of a life at sea. These are not just sunken ships, they are frozen moments of human endeavor, and with every careful excavation, we release another of the ocean's long-held secrets, letting the stories of those who sailed them finally reach the shore. The terror of a storm is best understood not through weather charts, but through the trembling hand of a person holding a pen. A young passenger aboard the clipper ship Flying Cloud during a Southern Ocean gale in 1851 wrote, "The ship is a living thing in agony. Every timber groans as if it will splinter, and the noise is a constant, deafening roar. We are all huddled below, the water sloshing over our feet with every lurch, and the only light comes from the lamp swinging wildly on its chain, casting dancing, monstrous shadows. I have never been so afraid, for it feels the ocean itself has decided we should not exist. This is not a historian's summary, it is a raw human pulse from the heart of the tempest." These diaries and letters, often written by candlelight as the ship heaved, are time machines of emotion. They capture the specific, chilling details that official logs omit. A mother traveling to join her husband in America in 1890 wrote to her sister, "I have tied my infant daughter to my body with a length of cloth, for fear she will be torn from my arms by the violence of the waves. The sound is not one of wind, but of 1,000 demons screaming just outside the thin wooden wall. I pray, but the words are stolen from my lips by the cacophony." You can feel the primal fear, the desperate grip on love in the face of annihilation. For the sailors, the entries are often more stoic but no less revealing. The log of a whaling ship's captain off the coast of Patagonia notes with stark simplicity, September 12th, "The glass has fallen to a level I have never seen. Lost the fore topmast and 2 good men, swept away before our eyes. No man slept, we are in God's hands now." That single phrase, "the glass has fallen," carries the weight of an entire crew's dread, knowing the barometer's plunge signaled a fury they might not survive. These personal accounts transform the storm from a historical event into a shared human experience. They remind us that within every legend of a ghost ship or a sunken treasure, there were real people feeling the same cold fear, whispering the same prayers, and clutching the same fragile hopes as any of us would. What final thoughts, what last words of love were hastily scribbled on a piece of paper and tucked into a pocket, hoping against hope they might one day be read by someone on a distant, peaceful shore? The ocean has shared its stories tonight, from ghost ships sailing through eternal storms to treasure galleons resting in silent, sunken halls. We have heard the echoes of pirates battling the gale and explorers riding its winds to new worlds. These historical mysteries, born from the very fury you hear in the distance, are the ocean's way of remembering. Now, as the rain falls and the thunder rumbles low, let these tales and the rhythm of the storm carry you the rest of the way to sleep. Allow your mind to release the day's worries, trading them for dreams of vast, star-filled seas and whispered legends from the deep. The sound of the waves is the oldest lullaby, and the stories are its verses. We would love to hear which mystery of the deep captured your imagination, or if you have a favorite maritime tale of your own. Share your thoughts below, or subscribe to join us on our next journey into the sound of history. For now, simply close your eyes, listen to the wind, and drift away.
you.